Have you ever wondered how someone who has always been considered a good person can suddenly take actions that shock everyone? How can a lifetime of kindness and integrity turn into a trail of questionable choices? It's easy to believe that good people never change, but reality is far more complex than it seems. And the most unsettling truth is that no one is completely immune to this transformation. In this video, you will discover how this change happens, what really leads someone to betray their values, and whether this reality could one day knock on your door. Stay with me until the end to understand what even movies fail to show about human nature. The true paradox of the good person is about to be revealed. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because here, we bring daily content that can truly transform your life. Being a good person goes beyond actions. For many, it is an identity that defines who they are. However, this goodness can be put to the test in challenging situations, such as betrayals or moments of deep pain, revealing a paradox. Why would someone with such solid principles start acting in an unexpected way? This goodness requires constant cultivation, but it does not always withstand the pressures of life. Judgment from others and the expectation of perfection can push someone into a cycle of guilt and frustration, where temptations or failures seem even greater. Paradoxically, the more someone clings to the image of being good, the greater the risk of acting contrary to their own values, like a father who lies to protect his child, or a leader who manipulates, believing they know what is best. At its core, being good involves recognizing and dealing with one's own shadows, yet many prefer to maintain an idealized image rather than face their weaknesses. The paradox of the good person emerges in this gap between who they want to be and what, in difficult circumstances, they ultimately reveal about themselves. The transformation from a good person to a bad one rarely happens overnight. In most cases, it is a gradual process, influenced by a series of psychological factors that slowly shape this person's view of the world and of themselves. Among the main triggers, stress and emotional pressure are at the top of the list. When someone faces constant crises or feels suffocated by emotional demands, they end up reaching such an extreme state of exhaustion that they start acting in ways they no longer recognize. Imagine, for example, someone who, year after year, dedicates themselves to caring for others without receiving proper support or recognition. This accumulation of tensions and frustrations can fuel a silent resentment. Over time, this emotional burden becomes almost unbearable, creating an internal conflict that distorts their perception of right and wrong. This person, once driven by empathy and compassion, begins to question whether their kindness is truly worth it. And it is in this psychological fracture that the first signs of change appear. Another major factor contributing to this transformation is the impact of painful experiences, such as betrayals or deep disappointments. When someone who values loyalty finds themselves betrayed, for example, they begin to question the trustworthiness of others. This type of event can create an emotional wound that, if left unhealed, turns into bitterness and eventually distrust. Little by little, the good person becomes more rigid, more defensive, and even cynical. The pain of the past starts guiding their decisions, and the kindness that once defined them gives way to an increasingly cold and distant demeanor. And we cannot ignore how accumulated frustration can intensify this change. As a person faces failures or feels that their efforts go unrecognized, resentment builds up. If not channeled in a healthy way, this resentment starts to distort their worldview and self-perception, altering values that once seemed unquestionable. It's as if each small disappointment slowly erodes their essence. The person who once found meaning in helping others now begins to wonder if they should only think of themselves. After all, how many times have they been left behind? The human mind also finds ways to protect itself from pain. And one of those ways is by creating internal justifications for behaviors that, under different circumstances, would seem inappropriate. When stress and resentment accumulate, a person begins to rationalize their negative actions. They may think, for example, that they are simply doing what needs to be done to protect themselves, or that others do not deserve their kindness. These justifications not only help momentarily ease guilt, but also pave the way for these new behaviors to become increasingly frequent. With all this in mind, it becomes clear that what leads a good person to stray from their original path is not a simple choice. It is a web of unresolved emotions, painful experiences, and psychological pressures that slowly alter their mental and emotional state. And this transformation, although subtle at first, can intensify to the point where this person becomes unrecognizable even to themselves. The question that remains is, Will they ever realize that they are drifting away from who they truly were? The environment surrounding a person and the relationships they maintain play a profound role in shaping and transforming their character. Toxic environments, whether at work, within family, or in social circles, can function as emotional traps. In an office where people are constantly competing for recognition, someone who has always valued cooperation may feel they need to be more cunning to avoid being left behind. They begin to let go of small parts of their integrity, believing they are merely making adjustments to survive. But these adjustments are deceptive. Each time they compromise a little of their values, it becomes easier to take the next step in that direction. And when we talk about external influences, we cannot ignore social pressure, which acts as an almost invisible force. Social groups can subtly shape how a person acts and thinks. If someone becomes involved in a group where questionable behaviors are normalized, there is a high chance that over time they will start behaving the same way. This is the phenomenon of social conformity in action. To avoid feeling excluded or out of place, the individual begins to make small compromises, believing it is just an innocent adaptation. But when they look back, they realize they no longer recognize themselves. In family settings, this influence can be even more intense and complex. A person who grew up in an environment where competition and comparison were constant tends to internalize those attitudes. Imagine someone who always felt pressured to be the best at any cost. Over time, this person may develop a distorted view of what is necessary to achieve success, including manipulative or selfish behaviors. In this case, the roots of wrongdoing did not stem from a conscious choice, but from a mental programming that has accompanied them since childhood. The power of the environment not only shapes, but can corrupt values almost imperceptibly. In communities or groups where collective well-being is not valued, where taking advantage of others' weaknesses is common, someone who was once upright may end up adopting a similar stance, often without realizing it. This transformation is slow and insidious, and at some point, the person begins to question, is it worth being good if everyone around me does the opposite? From there, their very essence of goodness begins to fragment, being replaced by a survival mentality. Thus, when examining the role of environment and relationships in a person's life, it becomes clear that no one is entirely immune to external influence. The choices someone makes are not only reflections of their essence, but also of what they have absorbed from their surroundings. And the longer they remain immersed in an environment that does not value the same principles, the greater the risk of those principles being lost. It is also not uncommon for people to change when they acquire power and control at some stage of their lives. Power has an almost magical ability to reveal, but also to transform a person's character. It is as if, upon reaching a position of control, something inside them awakens, something they may not have even known existed. This is one of the great paradoxes of power. It not only exposes someone's deepest intentions, but can also corrupt their original ones. And the most intriguing part is that often this process is so gradual and subtle that the person themselves does not realize the transformation. Power creates a sense of invulnerability that can be dangerous. When someone feels above others, they may begin to make moral concessions, believing their actions are justified because they deserve that freedom. This is one of the most common traps for those who attain positions of control. It is as if power creates a bubble, a distortion where the person no longer sees others as equals. They begin to see themselves as a judge, an authority, who, in order to ensure order or the greater good, can act arbitrarily. Throughout history, we have countless examples of how power changes behaviors. Great figures, once admired for their integrity, ended up being consumed by this transformative force. Napoleon Bonaparte, for example, started his journey as a defender of the revolutionary ideals of equality, but ended up becoming an emperor who wielded power despotically. This example is not far removed from the everyday reality of anyone who has ever experienced a small dose of power, who hasn't seen someone close to them change completely after assuming a position of leadership or influence. The issue of power also involves a profound psychological aspect: control. When someone gains control over a situation or others, it is common for them to feel increasingly tempted to expand that influence. The sensation of controlling others' destinies can become addictive, leading someone to cross moral boundaries that were once unquestionable. This person begins to justify their actions with the belief that they are simply doing what is necessary. And so, little by little, they drift further from what once defined them as good. Ultimately, power and control bring a constant moral challenge: how not to be corrupted by the influence we exert. Every person who attains power must constantly reflect on the impact of their choices and the limits they are willing to cross. The greatest risk here is that, in trying to maintain their position of authority, they may end up becoming exactly what they once vowed to fight against. What do you think? Do you believe that someone, upon gaining power, can truly maintain their values and kindness intact when a person starts straying from the values they once considered unshakable? One of the mind's first strategies is to seek internal justifications for these deviations. After all, no one wants to admit that they are acting in contradiction to their own morals. So the brain steps in, creating a narrative to soften the impact of questionable choices, a defense mechanism that protects self-esteem and self-image. This rationalization process may seem subtle at first, but it can slowly transform someone, making what was once unthinkable seem necessary. The concept of the greater good is another powerful tool for self-justification. How many times have we heard phrases like, "It's for their own good," or "I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do"? This kind of justification allows a good person to carry out morally questionable actions, believing they are somehow contributing positively. And the scariest part is that the more someone believes they are helping or correcting something, the less they see the harm they might be causing. This phenomenon creates an illusion of morality, where the true impact of their actions is obscured by a distorted perception of what is right. And here comes cognitive dissonance, a psychological phenomenon that describes the internal discomfort of acting against one's values. To reduce this dissonance, the person adjusts their perception of those values, or adapts their view of their own behavior. Thus, when making a questionable decision, they may reprogram their own mind to see that action in a positive light. Consider someone who has always valued honesty, but starts lying in small situations. Over time, this person begins to see lying as necessary in certain circumstances, until the behavior becomes normalized. These internal justifications arise not only to ease guilt, but also to preserve a self-image of goodness. It is as if the mind creates a narrative to sustain the image of a good person, even when, at times, that image is merely a convenient mask. The more justifications someone finds, the further they drift from their original morality, without realizing they are shaping a new version of themselves. And when they look back, they often wonder how they got to this point. But the answer lies in every small excuse they accepted along the way. In the end, this self-justification is like an invisible trail, leading a person to an unexpected destination. Every step taken, every concession made, builds a path that seems logical and even necessary, but ultimately takes them further from the goodness they once valued. Living under the ideal of goodness may seem like a noble goal, but the social expectations surrounding it can have an intense and even distorted impact on a person's behavior. After all, what does it mean to be good in the eyes of others? In many cases, the weight of these expectations creates a silent pressure, a constant demand for someone to behave impeccably, without flaws or missteps. Paradoxically, it is precisely this pressure to be perfect that can lead a person to hide their true feelings, adopting a mask of goodness that may eventually fall away. The need to live up to this ideal of goodness also causes many people to hide their true desires and opinions. How many times has someone accepted something they internally knew was unfair just to avoid disappointing those who see them as a good person? This continuous self-denial, suppressing their limits and desires, creates a disconnect between what they truly feel and what they show to others. Over time, resentment begins to build silently, accumulating and creating space for an unwanted transformation, one that the person themselves may not even understand. Moreover, when a society idealizes goodness to the point of making it an unattainable standard, it contributes to many people becoming morally hypocritical. In an effort to appear perfect, they adopt manipulative behaviors, always striving to fit the social ideal without questioning their own sincerity. This is particularly evident in people who publicly maintain an altruistic image, but, behind the scenes, are willing to do whatever it takes to protect their own interests. In these cases, goodness becomes merely a role played in pursuit of approval, and the impact of this pressure does not stop there. The need to maintain a good image in the eyes of others also prevents a person from developing a healthy relationship with their own flaws. The fear of disappointing others or being misinterpreted for showing vulnerability leads them to hide their mistakes, creating a barrier that distances them even further from authentic goodness. Because in the end, being good does not mean being perfect. It means being true, recognizing one's own mistakes, and learning from them. But, caught up in this idealization, the person becomes unable to accept their own imperfections. This ideal of goodness ends up generating a kind of gray area between what is genuine and what is merely appearance. The person who feels pressured to be good all the time loses touch with their own humanity, with the complexity that makes them unique. And, without realizing it, they begin to build a version of themselves that does not match reality. Human morality is rarely a matter of black and white. Instead, we live in a complex gray zone, where actions and intentions are not always purely good or entirely evil. This gray area represents the duality within all of us, the capacity for both altruistic actions and selfish choices, depending on the circumstances. The problem is that many people try to see themselves as entirely good, and this simplistic view prevents them from recognizing, accepting, and dealing with their own shadows. Carl Jung stated that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This teaching reminds us that, to truly understand who we are, we must look inward, beyond the appearances of goodness we present to the world. This darkness that Jung refers to is our shadow, the set of characteristics and impulses we repress out of fear that they may challenge our self-image of goodness. Recognizing this shadow does not mean embracing evil, but rather understanding that these facets are part of the human experience and need to be integrated consciously. Jung's concept of the shadow warns us of the danger of ignoring this internal complexity. When someone tries to suppress aspects of themselves that they consider undesirable, such as feelings of anger, envy, or selfishness, these repressed emotions end up manifesting in unexpected ways, often in actions that contradict the image of goodness they strive to maintain. Paradoxically, it is in the attempt to be perfect that impulsive behaviors arise, where the person gives in to morally ambiguous desires or actions. This struggle to keep the shadow hidden, instead of dealing with it, may cause the person to be guided by it, unconsciously. Jung also said, "He who looks outside, dreams. He who looks inside, awakens." This teaching is an invitation to reflection. Those who ignore the gray zone of their own morality may end up lost in a cycle of self-sabotage, repeating actions that take them further from their integrity. On the other hand, those who are willing to face their impulses and contradictions can develop a deeper and more authentic morality, understanding that true goodness requires accepting one's full humanity, both strengths and weaknesses. Thus, the gray zone of morality is where we all exist. No one is absolutely good or bad. We are made up of multiple intertwined facets. Recognizing this is essential to prevent our hidden impulses from guiding us unconsciously. But are we each truly willing to face our own shadow and accept this complexity? Or will we continue wandering through the world, chasing an illusory perfection that, in the end, may lead us to actions we never imagined we would take? Self-knowledge is an essential practice for staying true to one's values and principles, especially in a world filled with external influences and social pressures. When a person takes the time to look inward, understanding their desires, fears, and limitations, they build an inner fortress that helps them resist the temptation to give in to impulses or behaviors that contradict their morality. However, this process requires a rarely explored type of courage, the willingness to see oneself with honesty, without filters or excuses. A powerful strategy for strengthening ethical resilience is the constant practice of self-reflection. In practical terms, this means setting aside regular moments to evaluate one's choices and understand the reasons behind them. A simple exercise is to question, at the end of each day, whether the actions taken aligned with the values one holds most dear. This reflection can reveal hidden motivations and alert us to moments when we are drifting away from our true selves. Often, in the rush of everyday life, we lose sight of what truly matters, and self-reflection helps bring it back into focus. Jung offers us a powerful key on this path with his famous words, "He who looks outside, dreams. He who looks inside, awakens." This awakening he speaks of is the ability to develop an active consciousness, where choices stop being automatic reactions and become deliberate decisions. By practicing self-knowledge, a person awakens to their true self, understanding contradictions and accepting imperfections without allowing them to lead them away from their moral convictions. This process makes them less vulnerable to external influences and more focused on an authentic and lasting morality. Self-reflection also strengthens the ability to admit and correct mistakes. Everyone, at some point, makes decisions they later regret or realize were misaligned with their values. Instead of ignoring these missteps or seeking justifications, a person who practices self-knowledge learns to use them as opportunities for growth. They ask themselves, What can I learn from this? How can I act differently next time? This exercise not only helps maintain moral integrity, but also prevents mistakes from being repeated, reinforcing ethical resilience. For those seeking to uphold their values in a world that constantly challenges morality, self-knowledge serves as a reliable guide. It provides the ability to distinguish between fleeting impulses and true principles. Over time, this practice becomes a shield against negative influences, allowing one to make decisions that reflect their true essence, rather than external expectations or momentary desires. The final question is, are we ready for the challenge of looking inward and embarking on this journey of self-discovery? Contrary to what many might think, this is a continuous process that requires constant effort. However, those who commit to this path find not only a stronger sense of morality, but also a life more aligned with their true identity. Throughout this video, we have explored how goodness is not an unshakable guarantee, and that even the most upright person may be challenged to confront their shadows. From emotional pressures to the influence of power and societal expectations, each element contributes to the paradox of the good person, a constant dance between who we believe we are and who we truly are. However, recognizing this gray area in our morality is not a sign of weakness. It is an invitation to self-knowledge and continuous reflection. Only those who can face their flaws and less noble impulses can achieve authentic and lasting goodness. This is the true lesson. Instead of seeking perfection, which often turns out to be a fragile mask, we should strive for authenticity, the ability to understand and integrate all parts of ourselves. That is why I invite you to apply these teachings, to deepen your self-awareness, to reflect on your choices, and to allow yourself to be human with all the complexities that come with it. This practice can transform your life and your perspective on the world, strengthening the true goodness that exists within you. If you've made it this far, comment. Authenticity is true strength. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue exploring profound topics like this.